So, Ayo, so chapter 10 is about basic computer operations. So, what do you mean by computer operations? So, whatever we perform in a computer, those becomes computer operations, right? So, we are going to
Yeah.
learn few of them. So, if you take a system or a computer, we will have two things, hardware and software, right?
Yeah.
And they are
Yeah.
depending on each other. Without hardware, software doesn't exist. Without software, hardware doesn't exist, right? So, we all know that.
Yes.
So if any of this not functioning properly, a computer is of no use. So we will learn now the process to start a computer and know about software and its types. So procedure for starting a computer. We know like we just have to turn on the switch, give it a power and then start. We already know, but let's see in more technical terms. So what happens when we start a computer? Okay, so when we start a computer, the booting process begins. So whenever we start a computer, the process which happens, the first process is called booting. Okay, so what
Yes.
happens when we boot a computer? It will initially check whether all the hardware and software installed at the computer are working correctly. Okay, first thing what it does is it will check if all the equipments are all the hardware and software devices are functioning properly or not. That way we'll be seeing first. And then not we, the booting process checks that. And then it also
Yes.
loads all the files needed to run a system. So that is nothing but operating system. It loads all the files. And the next step is in the booting process is called post. So there is a full form for this post, that is power on self test. So as soon as the power gets on, it will pass on some electricity or some signals to all the devices and checks. And then this test checks the functionality of all the connected hardware, including primary and secondary storage devices also. So once this test is passed, then the contents of CMOS, that is complementary metal oxide semiconductor chips, are checked. So after this, what is going to check? CMOS. Can you please mute your mic, ma? Complementary metal oxide semiconductor. Oh, where is it getting typed? Okay, CMOS test will be initiated. So here it is a small amount of memory on the motherboard that stores the basic input operating system settings. These will be tested. And then the primary function of BIOS is to boot up an operating system on the computer. Booting up means starting up the computer. Then BIOS includes the instructions to local basic computer hardware, and it is responsible for accessing and configuring the system settings like password, date, and time. So as soon as you switch on or switch off the computer, still the time gets updated, right? In the notification area, can you see here? Even though you're switching off the computer, the time and day doesn't stop there. They'll keep on updating every second. So how is that happening? Because of this BIOS, it is working. So it includes the instructions to load basic computer hardware and also is responsible for accessing and configuring the system settings like passwords, date, and time. So inside there is a small battery. Even though you turn off your computer, these basic operations will be running on the battery with the help of that battery. So once all the steps of BIOS gets completed, the operating system is loaded into the computer. Now operating system loads into the computer. And then where is it loaded? It is loaded on random access memory, which is the primary memory. The operating system then executes the pre-configuration startup routines to define user configurations. Configurations is nothing but username, password, finger recognition, face recognition, all this. Once the booting process gets over, you can log into the computer with a username and a password. And the desktop of the operating system appears, and you can start working on the computer using the required software applications. So all this process will happen as soon as you switch on the computer and before you see the desktop on your screen. Clear about the process?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so now I have a small video. I'll be showing you that. Okay, now we have done with the process of starting a computer. Now let's see how we can shut down a computer. So shutting down the computer properly is very important because if you just switch off the power button or the switch, it may affect the life of the device or sometimes it will cause for the failure also. That's why it's always very important to properly shut down the computer. So what are the steps we need to follow is if you haven't saved any program, for suppose I want to shut down the computer now. Okay, so once I click on shutdown, it will ask me to close